can the passage of death be transformed into a stay that would last? What would last? Usually we know, symbolically we watched the dead 3 days. Because the elders who had, no doubt, removed that from the old animist religion, which they frequented the dead of meadows. They knew that a few days after death, the soul of the dead man was there, and that he had to be honored, had a good funeral. And so we watched his body for 3 days. And then the tradition is lost in the 20th century because hygiene, because the funerarium etc. Until we rediscover, thanks to the experiments near-death Dr. Moody, that it is true. The dead man comes out of his body, and he is there for a while, on earth. He observes what is happening around his body, and we do not see it. It's time to revive it. But tell him everything he saw with his eyes. And then often there are other stages that tell these witnesses, a tunnel that cross, and a being of light, full of love and truth that they meet on the other side of the tunnel, accompanied by their deceased relatives, of their guardian angel etc. All this corresponds to the announcement of the return of Christ in His glory, accompanied by saints and angels. But before this return of Christ, obviously this passage here between this world and the other, is death. And death normally only lasts a few days. We have, I think in the Bible, a metaphor for this passage in the book of the Exodus. Moses takes the Hebrew people, who are in Egypt, who are slaves, but who are at the same time well, because he had something to eat. He brings him out, by great powers, from this land of Egypt, which is the visible symbol of our terrestrial life. It is bad because one is a slave of a heavy body, a body that does not obey us well. But at the same time, we are fine, we build our house, we watch TV. And then comes death one day. An angel comes to pick us up. And this death visibly from the book of Moses, is a passage. A passage symbolized by the Sinai desert. So the crossing must last 3 to 8 days. In this passage, evil spirits rush towards us, symbolized by the army of Pharaoh, who wants to exterminate us. But fortunately at a given moment, God appears in His glory, in the form of a pillar of light, at night. It is placed between us and our enemies. She protects us. The day is a column of smoke, and all men can see it. So events happen in this passage of death. And then comes the other world, symbolized by a river, the Jordan. And Moses said to them, "Go now into the next world, and it is given to you." Only the Hebrew people are afraid. There are 2 reasons that make him afraid. First, he saw in this land, where spies were sent, giants, cities with huge ramparts. He is afraid that a terrible judgment will befall him. And second, he regrets Egypt, where there were onions to eat. And we were so good. And it was green, there was water everywhere. It's not like this desert. So because they do this, God says to Moses, they will stay in the wilderness 40 years and they will die there. And this parable indicates, that it may happen that a person who has just died, is not ready to face the merciful judge, because she thinks it terrible. Often it happens for people who have committed serious sins. Or she just died, and she is tied to the earth, and not ready to die. She wanted to stay. Saint Bernard tells the story of a young girl, like that, the sister of Saint Malachie, who died brutally at 17, who dreamed of getting married, who had fallen in love. And her brother saw her days later. She was circling her tomb, she wanted to get her body back. He might open masses to go to the next world, masses for the souls in purgatory. He saw her weeks later. She was at mass sitting with the women and watching the boys. He understood that she had stayed between this world and the other, too attached to the earth for a reason we understand, which is not nasty. Well, death seems to be turning into a stay that lasts, where Christ did not appear. And in this death, in this wandering between this world and the other, the person ends up despairing. She dies to herself. She thus becomes ready for the appearance of Christ, who can take her to heaven. So beware, what I'm saying here is about research. Books are written, it's not part of Catholic dogma yet, but it's interesting to see it. To know that, all that was believed, by ancient religions, and probably true in part, and that it is necessary to pray for these souls, which are finally in what one could call the second purgatory, the second heaven, the psychic sky, where he remains stuck for reasons depending on their dependencies.